Welcome to The Explainer. We are jumping right into one of the most absolute, head-spinning reversals we've seen in recent economic history. Seriously, we're talking about a massive whiplash in U.S.-India trade relations that played out over just 5 short months. Literally, from February to June of 2026, everything flipped. It's this wild story of grand economic promises, out-of-nowhere legal twists, and honestly just how incredibly fragile international diplomacy really is.
Let's start with a number. $500 billion. When I first saw that, it completely blew my mind. That was the highly ambitious bilateral trade goal they set for the year 2030. And just a few months ago, this astronomical figure wasn't some far-off pipe dream, right? It was the documented, targeted cornerstone of this newly cemented relationship between two of the biggest economies on the planet.
But, on the ground, this partnership basically lives in 2 totally different worlds. On one hand, you've got the diplomatic handshakes, the high-level negotiations, the grand geopolitical alignments. But on the other hand, you have the physical reality. We're talking massive cargo ships and literal mountains of shipping containers that carry the actual physical lifeblood of this agreement. So we're going to dive straight into how these agreements actually work mechanically and just how fast the water beneath those massive ships can get incredibly choppy.
So let's get right to it with Section 1, the Promise of February, a landmark deal.
Okay, to really understand this whiplash, we've got to look at where things started. Back in February 2026, Brickwork Ratings put out a report that just painted this picture of immense optimism. And the February deal? It wasn't just some minor, everyday adjustment. It was being hailed as a massive, landmark structural shift in economic relations. The sheer scale of what both sides were trading was huge. The U.S. agreed to cap reciprocal tariffs at 18%, and they completely eliminated these looming 25% punitive tariffs. In exchange for that, India committed to buying a staggering $100 billion worth of U.S. energy and tech. Plus, they made a massive geopolitical move by agreeing to halt purchases of Russian crude oil. It was your classic heavyweight diplomatic trade-off. Both sides were trading major domestic and geopolitical leverage just to build this solid foundation of stability.
And the crucial thing here is that this deal had an immediate, real-world impact. The Brickwork report actually called it the circuit breaker effect. Literally, almost overnight, the Indian rupee recovered from a record low of 92 all the way down to 90.5 against the US dollar. Now, why does that actually matter to you and me? Well, that kind of rapid currency stabilization instantly cools down market volatility. It acts as this massive green light of renewed investor confidence, and it completely accelerates foreign direct investment. So the foundation was officially set.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 2. Winners of the deal, and sectors bouncing back. Because with this newfound stability and this totally restored export competitiveness, certain industries were instantly poised to celebrate. Broad-based tariff relief is essentially a life-saving intervention for labor-intensive sectors. Take the textile industry, for example. The U.S. market accounts for something like 28% of India's entire textile exports, and before this deal, they were facing a severe, frankly existential threat of a 50% punitive tariff. Just imagine that. But dropping that tariff down to 18%, that restored their price competitiveness overnight, and it prevented this massive flight of orders to competing nations.
And when you see that kind of surging market confidence, it's because the threat of devastating tariffs has just evaporated. By stabilizing export volumes, this deal directly supported income in major manufacturing hubs, which then fueled retail consumption and ultimately strengthened the entire economy. It was effectively taking Indian MSMEs, those micro, small, and medium enterprises, and plugging them directly into global supply chains.
And all of this optimism really culminated in this one sentiment from Arvind Panagarya, the chairman of the 16th Finance Commission. He summed it up perfectly, calling it a rare win-win negotiated by 2 highly demanding counterparts. I really want you to keep that quote in mind, because this moment right here, this was the absolute peak of the economic utopia. It was a complete bilateral victory. But, as we're about to see, in the world of global trade, the floor can drop out from under you in the blink of an eye.
So now we have to shift gears completely for Section 3, the Supreme Court twist. Now we're looking at a huge catalyst detailed by the Hindustan Herald. What on earth caused this entire landscape to just flip upside down? Let's walk through this timeline for a second, because it is absolutely fascinating. Early February, the landmark deal is signed. Handshakes, smiles, the rupee recovers, everything's great. But quietly, over in the U.S., on February 20th, the Supreme Court struck down a massive chunk of globally applied tariffs that President Trump had originally put in place. The court ruled that they exceeded executive authority. Boom. Fast forward to June, and suddenly the U.S. Trade Representative proposes sweeping 12.5% penalty tariffs on India. It's crazy. A purely domestic U.S. legal ruling created immediate, undeniable international fallout.
To understand why the U.S. responded like this, you really just have to look at the math. $170 billion. That is the annual revenue the U.S. government was pulling in from those global tariffs that the Supreme Court had just struck down. Suddenly, that massive chunk of money was in serious legal jeopardy. The U.S. administration essentially woke up with a $170 billion hole in its pocket. And as the Hindustan Herald pointed out, they needed to find another door into the exact same building to recoup that lost revenue.
And that brings us to Section 4, the 12.5% reality check.
So, what was the exact mechanic the U.S. administration decided to use? Well, they found their new door through something called forced labor tariffs. And for Indian exporters, this was a harsh reality check. The U.S. Trade Representative formally proposed these additional duties on goods from 60 different countries, and yep, India was on that list. The stated structural policy reason was that these economies failed to ban imports made with forced labor. Now, this is a completely different legal mechanism than the prior tariffs, right? But the financial result for trading partners? It was exactly the same, if not worse. The contrast here is just staggering. Back in February, negotiators spent countless hours crafting this highly targeted 18% cap, offering very calculated, broad relief to protect key labor-intensive sectors. It was surgical, you know? But then comes June, a blanket 12.5% additional duty, just a sudden, unexpected, across-the-board penalty that instantly overshadowed all of that targeted relief in one single move.
I really need to stress the sheer scale of this June announcement. This is a 12.5% duty on everything. We're not just talking about a tariff on steel or a penalty on some specific agricultural goods. No, it is on literally everything India exports to America. For Indian exporters who had quite literally just recalibrated their entire business models around the February deal, this landed incredibly hard. It suddenly put millions of jobs right back on the chopping block.
Which leaves us with Section 5, the $500 billion question.
So let's bring this whole narrative full circle. We started out looking at the grand, super optimistic ambitions of February, and we've just seen the harsh, sudden reality check of June. The big question is, can a $500 billion trade goal possibly survive a sudden blanket 12.5% penalty? If nothing else, this entire situation highlights just how incredibly fragile global agreements really are. You can have the most perfectly negotiated, win-win international trade deal on paper, but the moment intense domestic legal and financial pressures collide with that agreement, the whole shebang can change in an instant. Thanks for hanging out with me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll catch you next time as we keep breaking down this wild, complex world of ours.